I was watching the oil delivery truck try to navigate up my driveway for the third time when Veronica Thornton stepped directly into its path, with her arms spread wide, like she was trying to stop a tank in Tiananmen Square. The temperature outside was already hovering around 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and my heating oil gauge had been sitting on empty for 2 days. This was not the time for HOA theatrics. You cannot park that monstrosity here. Veronica shrieked at the driver, her voice carrying across the entire cul-de-sac of our Ridgewood Heights subdivision in northern New Jersey. She was wearing a puffy white coat that made her look like an aggressive marshmallow, and her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back so tightly that I wondered if it was contributing to her permanent scowl. I threw open my front door and stepped onto the porch, my breath visible in the freezing January air. "Veronica, that truck needs to fill my heating oil tank. Move your car." She had parked her silver Lexus SUV diagonally across my driveway entrance, blocking the oil truck from getting close enough to reach my fill pipe. The truck was idling in the street, its hazard lights blinking orange in the gray winter morning. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of our HOA bylaws clearly states that commercial vehicles are not permitted to park on residential driveways during peak visibility hours, Veronica announced, pulling a leather-bound copy of the bylaws from her designer purse like she was a lawyer presenting evidence in court. Peak visibility hours. Veronica, it's 7:30 in the morning on a Thursday. Most people are either at work or getting ready for work. And the truck isn't parking, it's making a delivery that will take maybe 20 minutes. The bylaws don't distinguish between parking and idling, she said, her chin tilted up in that infuriating way that made me want to scream. As HOA president, it's my responsibility to ensure all residents comply with our community standards. The oil truck driver, a middle-aged guy named Frank who I'd dealt with for the past 5 years, leaned out his window. "Listen, lady, I've got 4 more deliveries today, and this cold snap has everybody running low. Either move your vehicle or I'm going to have to skip this address and come back next week." "Next week," I said, feeling panic rise in my chest. "Frank, my tank is bone dry. I've been running space heaters to keep my pipes from freezing." "Sorry, buddy," Frank said, genuinely apologetic. "But I can't block traffic all day while you sort out your neighborhood drama." Veronica crossed her arms triumphantly. "Perhaps this will serve as a lesson about respecting community guidelines, Lawrence." "My name is Liam," I said through gritted teeth. She'd lived 3 houses down from me for 2 years and still couldn't get my name right. "Liam Crawford, and I've lived here for 6 years, which is longer than you've been HOA president. Be that as it may, rules are rules." She turned to Frank. "If you attempt to make this delivery, I will file a formal complaint with your company and pursue legal action against both you and Mr. Crawford for violating our community covenants." Frank looked at me with sympathy, then shook his head. "I can't risk my job over this. I'll put you back on the schedule, but it's going to be at least a week, maybe 10 days with this weather." I watched helplessly as Frank pulled the truck away, its diesel engine rumbling down Maple Grove Drive. The temperature inside my house had already dropped to 58 degrees overnight. Without heating oil, it would continue falling. Veronica returned to her Lexus, climbed in, and drove away without another word. I stood on my porch, shaking with cold and anger, trying to figure out my next move. My house was a 3-bedroom colonial that I'd bought right after my divorce from my ex-wife, Sarah. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I'd worked hard to maintain it exactly to HOA specifications. My lawn was always mowed to the approved height. My mailbox was the correct shade of black. I'd even replaced my front door last year because Veronica claimed the previous one was too rustic for our neighborhood aesthetic. I'd done everything by the book, and this was how she repaid me. I went back inside and cranked up the 3 space heaters I'd been running, knowing they were costing me a fortune in electricity, but having no other choice. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, and pulled up the HOA bylaws that every homeowner received when they purchased property in Ridgewood Heights. Section 12. Paragraph 4 did indeed mention commercial vehicles, but as I read the actual language, I realized Veronica had interpreted it in the most restrictive way possible. The rule was designed to prevent people from parking work trucks and vans overnight, not to block essential service deliveries. There was even an exception clause for necessary maintenance and utility services. I took screenshots of the relevant sections and composed an email to the HOA board. Besides Veronica, there were 4 other board members: Dennis Young, who worked in pharmaceutical sales; Patricia Morrison, a retired teacher; Greg Sutherland, who owned a local insurance agency; and Helen Kozlowski, who was a dentist. I'd always gotten along fine with all of them, though Veronica clearly dominated the board's decision-making. In my email, I explained what had happened, cited the exception clause, and requested an emergency board meeting to address Veronica's overreach. I sent it off and then called my buddy Marcus, who was a real estate attorney in Newark. "Liam, good to hear from you," Marcus said when he picked up. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, and Marcus listened quietly until I finished. "Okay, so first thing, she can't legally prevent you from receiving heating oil. That's considered an essential utility service. Second, even if the HOA bylaws were as restrictive as she claims, she doesn't have the authority to physically block your driveway. That's harassment at minimum, possibly false imprisonment of your property. So what do I do? Document everything. Take photos of your oil gauge, your thermostat, everything. Keep records of all communication with her and the HOA. If your house temperature drops to dangerous levels, that's potentially property damage. If your pipes freeze and burst, she could be liable. I don't want to sue anybody, Marcus, I just want heat. I understand, but you need to protect yourself. Call your oil company back and explain that you have a legal right to receive delivery. If they won't come back, find another company. And if Veronica blocks your driveway again, call the police. She doesn't own the street or your property." After hanging up with Marcus, I called 3 other oil delivery companies. The first 2 couldn't fit me in for at least 2 weeks. The third, a smaller operation called Prestige Heating Oil, said they could come out Saturday morning, 3 days away. "That's the best we can do," the dispatcher told me. "Everybody's slammed right now because of the cold." "Saturday works," I said, even though the thought of another 3 days in a freezing house made me want to weep. "But I need to warn you. I have an HOA president who might try to block your truck." "Sir, we deal with HOAs all the time. As long as we're making a legitimate delivery, they can't stop us. If someone tries, we document it and contact the authorities if necessary. You just make sure your fill pipe is accessible." That evening, the temperature in my house dropped to 52 degrees. I wore 2 sweaters and sat in front of a space heater while eating microwaved soup for dinner. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with an email from the HOA board. It was from Patricia Morrison, the retired teacher. "Dear Liam, we received your email regarding this morning's incident. The board will convene for an emergency meeting on Friday evening at 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. All relevant parties will be invited to present their perspectives. Best regards, Patricia." At least they were taking it seriously. I spent the rest of the evening drafting notes for what I wanted to say at the meeting, making sure to keep everything factual and professional despite my anger. Friday arrived with temperatures dropping even further. The forecast called for a low of 9 degrees Friday night. Inside my house, the thermostat read 48 degrees when I woke up. I could see my breath. I took photos of the thermostat, the oil gauge reading empty, and the 3 space heaters running at full blast. Then I went to work, grateful that my office downtown had functioning heat. I worked as a project manager for a construction firm, which meant I understood contracts, regulations, and legal documents better than most people. I knew Veronica was wrong, but I also knew that HOA disputes could drag on for months if not handled correctly. Some people treated HOA boards like their personal fiefdoms, and Veronica Thornton was definitely one of those people. At lunch, I called my insurance company to ask about coverage if my pipes froze. The agent told me that damage from frozen pipes was typically covered, but my rates would likely increase after a claim and I'd have to pay my deductible. It would be cheaper and easier to just get heating oil, assuming Veronica didn't block the truck again. When I got home from work Friday evening, my house was 45 degrees inside. I fed my cat, Winston, who was huddled in a blanket on the couch looking miserable. I felt terrible for him. This was no way for any living creature to exist. I arrived at the community clubhouse at 6:45, 15 minutes early. The clubhouse was a small building at the entrance to our subdivision with a meeting room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. The board used it for monthly meetings and residents could rent it for parties. Tonight, the parking lot had 5 cars: Veronica's Lexus, Patricia's Honda, Dennis's Tesla, Greg's pickup truck, and Helen's Subaru. I walked in to find all 5 board members already seated at a long table at the front of the room. Folding chairs were set up for residents, but I was apparently the only one attending. Veronica sat in the center chair, looking smug and composed. She'd changed from her marshmallow coat into a navy blue pantsuit that screamed, "I'm important." "Good evening, Lawrence,"